Okay, so Boker Tov everyone and Shavua Tov. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to be learning about Parsha Vayakhel and also about this very special year, the year of Shmita. This year is a very unique year. It has a very special mitzvah that we are obligated to do and we have the merit to do. And this mitzvah applies only in Eretz Israel, only in Israel. This is something that we can't do anywhere else. If we would be overseas, wherever it is, the mitzvah does not apply. So we have a great zchus of being able to keep this mitzvah. The mitzvah of Shmita is a very important mitzvah. Every 7 years, Am Yisrael that live in Eretz Israel are obligated to abandon their lands, which means they are not allowed to work the land, to water the land, to plant anything, if it's trees, whatever it is, we do not work the land. And this is a special mitzvah that we are supposed to do every 7 years. And it's such an important mitzvah. In a moment, we'll speak about the meaning in our days and how it applies to us, even though we don't have a field, right? We might not have a field. In those days, every person, if he had no field, so he always had a garden or some piece of land where he was able to grow vegetables, etc., because that's what they lived on. So everyone had that, and this mitzvah applied to everyone. But here's an interesting proof that it's such an important mitzvah. How long lasted the first exile? The exile between the first temple and the second temple. So if we'll calculate the years, we'll see that it sums up to 70 years exactly. Between the day that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple until the days of Koresh and Daryavesh, the kings that came after Achashverosh, who we'll learn about soon, coming up to Purim. So his child and his grandchild permitted Am Yisrael to rebuild the temple. It took exactly 70 years. Why 70 years? So these 7 years are against 70 years of Shmita and Yovel that Am Yisrael did not observe. Am Yisrael did not keep the 70 years they were obligated to do over a period of course, more than 400 years. And if we'll divide over 400 years to 7, and we'll add the Yovel as well, which is also an additional year that once every 50 years we are obligated to abandon the land once again, we'll come to an amount of 70. And it's something that Hashem says in the Parsha itself also, that when our land will be left because we would go off to exile, that's when the land would also be Yotzi, the years of Shmita. So that's just a hint to show us how important it is to keep this year of Shmita, because it was a huge nisayon. It was such a challenge for people that their entire life was based on agriculture, on their own private garden that they had. And today it also applies. The Shmita is, of course, in the lands and in the fields that we can see around us. But the lesson applies to each and every one of us in our homes. Because what Hashem is basically doing with this mitzvah of Shmita, Hashem is practically giving us a practical challenge in emunah and in bitachon. in trusting and in believing Hashem. If a person has no living, and if a person has no resource to what we call today parnasa, that is a very hard challenge. How much faith in Hashem, how much belief and trust we have to rely on Him, even though Hashem say, you might need to leave this method and this tool of bringing parnasa home. And this is how Shmita applies to each and every one of us, even though we might not have a piece of land, even though we might not have a garden. Maybe we just buy flowers, or we have a few plants, but not more than that. What does Shmita mean to us today? Shmita means to us in our days. It means to us our parnasa. And in what way we should approach our parnasa. How should we look at our parnasa? What should we, how much effort should we put in our parnasa? Of course, we know that we don't work 7 days, and this isn't something obvious or isn't something easy. Maybe in our days it became a bit more obvious. But if we're talking about 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, especially in America, if you walk around, you'll see that in the stores in Crown Heights and Borough Park and many other stores, it says Shomer Shabbos. And that was a sign of pride, Yiddish pride, because it wasn't so simple. It wasn't so easy. People used to change jobs from 1 week to the other because they told the boss on Friday, I'm not coming in for Shabbos. And the boss told them, you know what, you're not coming in for Shabbos, don't come in for Sunday either. It was a great challenge. That's the challenge of Shmita. That's the challenge of Parnasa. And soon we're going to also talk about the difference between the Shmita and Shabbos. But generally speaking, it's this same nisayon, this same challenge that we face on Shabbos. The challenge of approaching Parnasa. So what is actually the approach of Judaism and of Hasidus on this concept of Parnasa, making a living? It's very interesting because we see a hint in our Parsha. Our Parsha is Parsha Vayakhel. Moshe Rabbeinu gathers the entire Jewish nation. And he has quite a few important messages to tell them. The main message is teaching them about the Mishkan, telling him, repeating once again, all of what we just learned in our past parashiyos about the importance of the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Sheishes Yomim Tavoid, Ubayayim Hashvi'i Tishbois. 6 days you are obligated to work, and on the 7th day you should rest. And it's very important. Moshe Rabbeinu is basically telling Am Yisrael at this moment, reminding them once again about Shabbos. Moshe Rabbeinu finds this opportunity appropriate to mention So we can see here that the way that Moshe Rabbeinu tells us about the Shabbos is a special way, because he doesn't just say, Sheishes Yamim Tavoid, you should work for 6 days, but he doesn't just say that on the 7th day you should rest. He mentions that you should work during the 6 days. And here is a hint where the Torah encourages us to go out and to work and to bring a parnasa. And as we know in Chassidus, the importance of elevating the material and physical world around us, we can understand how important it is to actually go out and make a living through elevating the things around us. But there's also something interesting over here, and this is the conflict between the two. Well, should I, if everything, let's ask a question like this. If parnasa is from Hashem, and we know that the bracha of Hashem, birkas Hashem hitashir, the bracha, the blessing of Hashem, that is the one that actually makes us rich, that gives us the parnasa. So then why do I need to go out and work? And if I need to go out and work, and that's what gives me the blessing, why do I need to involve Hashem in that? So, in other words, who are we relying on? Are we relying on the ways of the nature, or are we relying on Hashem? If we rely on Hashem, so let's sit all day and learn Torah. Let's sit all day, do mitzvahs, learn Torah, daven, pray. But why do we need to go out and work? What is this command that's hinted in our parsha? 6 yamim ta'aseh melacha. 6 days you should go and do a melacha. We rely on Hashem. Hashem should supply us the same way as He supplied the manna, and He can. For 40 years, Am Yisrael did not need to work. They were in the desert. And nevertheless, they had everything they wanted. And if Hashem wants us to go out and work, so where is the emunah here? Where is the belief in Hashem? Where does that get us in our daily life when we go out and work? So in order to understand this, let's talk a bit about the sin of idol worshipping. Avodah Zarah. It started, the Maimonides tells us how it all began. Because it's very interesting, because Hashem created Adam. There's a creator, that the world did not create itself, and that not only that it did not create itself, but that the world also, for sure, there's no statue or a certain star that created the world. So what happened was that throughout the generations, people still remember that Hashem was the one that created the world. But nevertheless, they saw certain ways to connect to stars, and through connecting to the stars, they would get a special blessing. And of course, they knew that the stars are some kind of minister. They didn't think that the stars actually are the ones that created the world. They knew that Hashem created the world, but they said that there is some kind of benefit worshiping them, because in our days, we don't understand in it. We don't understand enough about the way the stars work and the way to get the stars' blessing, so to speak. But in those days, they actually knew the method. And as we know, a lot of things are dependent on the moon and on the sun. The tide, for example, is connected to the moon. Not only the tide, but also growing certain vegetables. So the light of the moon is very important for them. And in those days, they knew much more about the relationship between the stars and this world. And that, therefore, and the example that Chassidus brings is that it was something similar to sitting in a restaurant and to receiving from the waiter your food. So you might say, the one that I've got to thank is the waiter. And he's the one that I've got to build a relationship to get whatever it is, more food, or to get a better part of the food, or to get something extra, to get a dessert at the end. But you've got to remember that he is just the waiter. He isn't the chef that actually makes the food. He's just the one that brings it to you. So don't think that he is the one to thank. You've got to thank the chef in the kitchen that you sometimes might not see, but he is the one that's actually, he's the one that actually makes your food. Nevertheless, if you'll talk nicely to the waiter and if you'll tip him, he might provide you with extras. He might provide you with a better part and maybe more food, dessert, whatever it is, because Hashem gives us a certain way to make a mistake and to think that he actually is the one that's authorized. And it's already hinted in the first Parsha. Hashem gives us an opportunity to make a mistake. Parshas Bereshis, Hashem says, Naaseh Adam b'tzalmeinu k'dmuseinu. We shall create a human. And when he says we, who is he referring to? So it says, we doesn't mean that there are many gods, chas v'shalom. It says that Hashem consulted with his best din, as Hashem wants to teach us that you've got to consult before you do something. But it's not that he consulted with another god, chas v'shalom. So why doesn't he just make it simple and say, I shall create? Why does he say we shall create? And to try and avoid any mistakes, any bad interpretations of the meaning we shall create? The answer is that Hashem gives us the possibility of making a mistake. Hashem wants us to find the truth in our own way. So this is basically the story of how people started to worship idols. At the beginning, everyone knew that there's one creator and we should serve him directly and only him. After a few generations, people remembered, yes, Hashem created the world, but if I'll talk to the waiter in a nice way, if I'll bow down to the sun or to the moon, the sun or the moon will help me with whatever I'm doing now, with whatever I'm growing. And their children saw the father bowing down to the sun. So they started to say, well, the sun is the creator. And they forgot about the Hashem. And slowly but surely people started worshipping idols and statues and trees. And that's how after a few hundred years, they totally forgot about Hashem. That's the story of idol worship. Why is that so important? Because this teaches us about what we might do in our days. Idol worshiping isn't always just about having a statue and bowing down to the statue and praying to it. Sometimes in our lives, we might misinterpret and we might give a bit more honor to the waiter, even though he does not deserve it. And who is this waiter? The waiter is our parnasa. The waiter is our trade. The waiter is our investment in making a living. So Hashem says, Sheishes Yamim Ta'avod. Yes, you should work for 6 days. That is what gives you the living. I am the one that provides you your living. That is just the natural way of you receiving my blessing. That is your tool, your hishtadlus. We all know the word hishtadlus, effort, putting in effort into making a living. Yes, because Hashem wants us to make an effort. He's not going to just give it to us for free like the 40 years in the desert. because the 40 years in the desert was a special time. But otherwise, Hashem wants us to work in this world, to elevate the world, to purify the world, to use the world, to use the material part of the world, and to elevate that. And in that way, we are making the world a better place. But we shall not forget that the real blessing comes from Hashem, comes directly from Hashem. Why is it important to remember that? Because if someone will tell us, you know what, you should work in an unkosher way, you should work during Shabbos, you'll say no. The parnasa comes from Hashem. Hashem does not want me to do that. I've got to do my hishtadlus, I've got to put in effort, I've got to make a vessel, I've got to be a bit in the ways of nature in order to receive the blessing. That's right. But it's only in those limits that Hashem tells us to do. Because once again, it's not the trade that gives me the money, it's Hashem that gives me the money through me behaving and acting in a certain way. And Hashem wants me to do that. That's part of his meaning, and that's what's hinted in our parsha. Hashem just doesn't say rest on the seventh day. Work for 6 days, then rest on the seventh day. Work for 6 days means that is the way that I want you to make a tool for my blessing. But it's my blessing. This is also the story of Shmita. This is how the Shmita applies to each and every one of us, even though we might not have a field. In those days, Hashem said, in the 7th year, don't forget about me. Don't forget that the reason that you might be working the land isn't because, isn't in the same way as your neighbor, your Gentile neighbor does it. Yes, the Gentile neighbor does not need to believe in Hashem, that Hashem is the one that provides everything. Your Gentile neighbor might work on the 7th year, and he might work on each and every year, and he doesn't believe that Hashem is giving him the blessing, and he'll grow the same amount as you grow. But nevertheless, we know that Birkas Hashem hi tashir. The blessing of Hashem is the one that makes us rich. This is also connected to any other natural method that we take in our lives. The way to approach visiting a doctor, for example. Why do I need to visit a doctor? What's the point of visiting a doctor? Hashem, I'll pray to Hashem. And if Hashem thinks that I should become healthy, I will become healthy. Because it's all up to Hashem, isn't it? Is it not up to Hashem? And if someone will visit the best doctor in the world, and Hashem won't want him to get better, he won't get better. So why to go to a doctor in the first place? And if I do go to the doctor, then why do I need to pray to Hashem? We need the combination. Not only the technical combination of praying and going to the doctor, but understanding that there's a combination that Hashem wants us to take, which is believing that he is the light. He is the one that actually provides the care. But he wants you to go through a doctor. He wants you to make a vessel. He wants you to make a kli to receive his blessing of refuah. We should all not need this blessing. But if we need this blessing, that is the true way. That's why in many cases, the Rebbe always mentioned that the doctor isn't the one that decides. People sometimes think, you know what, the doctor said something, he decides my fate. He's going to decide what's the end of the story. No. The doctor does not have from Hashem the permission to decide. Hashem is the one that decides. The doctor has the way to treat the person, not the final decision. not the final decision. The final decision is up to Hashem. He has the method how to treat this person. And that's why many times the Rebbe said to consult with 3 different doctors. After you consult with 3 different doctors, you basically seen all your options for the blessing of Hashem. You made your keli, you made your vessel as wide as possible for the blessing of Hashem. You've got 3 different opinions. And this principle has to do with anything else that has to do with nature. Who rules? Does Hashem rule the world, or does nature rule the world? Hashem rules the world. He is the one that provides us everything, but he wants us to do things in a natural way. And because he wants us to do things in a natural way, that is the way that we do it, and that's the way that we're obligated to do. So once again, this is the service. Vayakhel Moshe, our Parsha, is about Moshe Rabbeinu gathering Am Yisrael together. And one of the things that Moshe Rabbeinu tells them is 6 days you should work, and on the 7th day you should rest. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling him that this is the important lesson that you should know. One of the most important things in your lives as Jewish people is knowing to combine the two. On the one hand, going and working, which means making a vessel for the bracha of Hashem. But on the other hand, never forget that it's the blessing of Hashem here. And that's why on the 7th day, rest. Even though your boss might say you've got to be here on the 7th day, no. The 7th day I rest because the money that I receive from you, you are just like a waiter that provides me the food, but you aren't the one that actually makes the food. And this is also something that is connected to the Shmita. That's the whole idea about the Shmita. Very challenging. Am Yisrael during the first temple weren't able to actually observe the Shmita because it's such a challenge. Who's going to provide you with food? Hashem will make sure to provide each and every one of us with the exact blessing we need. Shavua Tov.